This is the Mission Shaped Podcast. You're listening to the Author's Take.
Hello, good afternoon. Welcome to this Fresh Expressions podcast, The Author's Take. My name is Ben Aldous, and I'm part of the Fresh Expressions National Leadership Community. But in my day job, I work for Churches Together in England, which is the national ecumenical instrument. And my role is as Principal Officer for Mission and Evangelism, which sounds very grandiose. But really what that means is I help curate and host a number of conversations amongst denominational leaders with the portfolio for mission and evangelism across our 54 member churches. But I'm not alone here this afternoon. I've got three friends, well, certainly two, hoping that a third will come along, who are also contributing authors of this newish book, which I was kind of lead editor of, called Lived Mission in 21st Century Britain, Ecumenical and Post-Colonial Perspectives. And a shout out to my fellow editors, Victoria Turner at Ripon College, Harvey Kuyani from CMS, and Peniel Rajkumar from USPG, who can't be with us today. But before we dive into some of the ideas behind this book and some of its chapters that were written, let's find out who our guests are. So I'm delighted to be joined by Shermara, Elizabeth and Niall. Firstly, Shermara, this is
Hi.
How you doing?
I'm well. Thanks so much for having me.
Oh, it's so great to have you with us, Shermara. Shermara Fletcher-Hoyte is from CTE, my colleague, working together in the National Ecumenical Instrument. Shermara, just tell us a little bit about yourself.
Okay, well, thanks again for having me, and congratulations on this amazing book that you've been lead editor for. So as you've said, I'm the Principal Officer for Pentecostal, Charismatic and Multicultural Relations at Churches Together in England, and like yourself, help to convene and broker relationships to really advance the engagement of Pentecostals and Charismatics, as well as young adults, and implementing racial justice strategies amongst our 54 member churches. Outside of that, I'm also a minister at the Church of God of Prophecy. I'm an international peace ambassador for the Women's Federation of World Peace, contribute to book chapters like today. And I have an amazing husband who I always shout out, Benjamin. And just doing life really. Yeah, I get brownie points for that. But yeah, that's a little bit about me.
Shermara, I know that a defining moment in your career was being invited to read scripture at Queen Elizabeth II's state funeral back in September 2022 before a massive audience of about 4 billion people. Obviously, that's an important personal way marker for you. But what do you think it meant for the wider church in Britain as you, as a Black young woman in that place?
Yeah, I think it spoke historical volumes in the sense of the representation of being in that space. I think also reading the prayers that the Queen had written really echoed how much she was a Christian and did believe, and the role of the state and church coming together was in full force at that moment. You know, as I was walking in the procession and hearing the trumpets and, you know, that honoring of God in the space, it was very profound. When they broke the scepter, you know, she is a global authority. But in that moment, we saw her humanity. And she laid her crown down. And as a Pentecostal, I would say before the King of Kings. In terms of cultural representation, you know, after reading in front of, 4.1 billion people, I had a lot of, especially young adults, millennials, messaging me, flooding my inbox. Oh my goodness, you've represented us, and how could you do this? I had some pushback as well. You know, I don't want to present it as all kumbaya, you know, the legacies of colonialism and what does that mean to stand in that space. But I'm glad I did it, and I think it broke a lot of glass ceilings for many, many others.
Thank you so much, Shermara. Let's bring on our second guest and author, which is Niall Cooper. Niall, you've been at Church Action on Poverty for the last 28 years. You're an author in this book with a brilliant chapter. Tell us a little bit about yourself, Niall.
Thanks, Ben. It's great to be here as well. It's great to be here with Shermara. So yeah, I've been running Church Action on Poverty for 28 years. It's an anti-poverty charity, but rooted in the churches. We have membership supporters across the churches, and a lot of our work is working with people in communities that are on the front line of poverty to give them a voice, but also to try and emphasize that they have dignity and agency and a vision for the kind of communities and world that they want to live in. And it's how do we get alongside as wider institutions, churches, people of faith, the visions that people have for themselves, and uphold their God-given identity as human beings. Alongside that, in my kind of non-work life, I convene a partnership of 9 United Reformed and Baptist churches in Manchester and Salford, the Manchester and Salford Urban Mission Partnership. So kind of at the coalface of, well, what does that actually mean in practice for churches that are in many cases in quite low-income communities and struggling with these issues day to day.
You've been in this role, Niall, for 28 years. That's quite a long time, isn't it? I mean, I guess why have you remained in the post for such a significant period of time?
The thing that's inspired me and kept me going all the way through has been the witness of people with lived experience that I've got to know and count as my friends. The inspiration that they have to keep going. I think of Wayne from Worthing. People don't think Worthing's a kind of poor place, but there's always, you lift the carpet up, one side of the road is wealth, the other side of the road is poverty. And Wayne spoke at our first national poverty hearing over almost 30 years ago and talked about poverty being a battle of invisibility. He's been involved ever since, and it's like he's an inspiration for me, and I could talk about many others. That's what keeps me going. It's tough. It's not tough for me in the sense that this has been a job for me, but for the people and communities that we work with, it's as tough now as it's ever been in many ways. But people are resourceful and courageous, and keep that flame of hope going. That things must be better. We have a vision of a better world, and it's incredible how people sustain their vision and battle on.
Yeah, thank you so much, Niall. We are hoping she is with us. Okay, so next up to this wonderful trio is Elizabeth Joy, who is part of the Malankara Syrian Orthodox Church. Elizabeth is a trustee of CTE, but she also has a really interesting day job. I hope she's around. Oh, no, unfortunately, she's not with us. So we will hope that she can join us a bit later on the call. Let me ask you both a question. What made you want to contribute a chapter to this book? What was it that, in my emails that I sent you, I must have been now almost 3 years ago, why did you say yes rather than no? Because I know you both have many other emails that come into your inbox. Why don't you kick us off, Shermara?
Yes, I was really captivated by the title, and what you asked me specifically to write about millennial perspectives on racial justice and how this, impacts mission was something that completely captivated me because it's my context. I'm hearing on the ground many people speaking about this area. And I think to actually write and represent that view in the context of mission is really important, particularly where we are culturally and where Britain is going, views around migration, views around race, and I'll speak more about that later on. But I just think it was important to put that perspective in this space. So yeah, I think your title was captivating. What you asked me to write about wasn't only culture relevant, but I think is important for this moment we are in as a country.
Yeah, thank you. So it was a kind of Kairos point, I guess, for you in that sense. And Neil, I know that my fellow editor Victoria got in touch with you. What made you say yes to writing a chapter?
I think there's a level of surprise actually. No, my life's been as an anti-poverty campaigner, so it was interesting being asked to write a chapter for a book on missiology. Some people might think that's a bit strange. One thing that we've been captivated about for many years, it's a phrase Pope Francis used, I think, fairly early on in his papacy. His challenge for the church to be a church of and for the poor, to be a poor church of and for the poor. And there's kind of problems about the phrasing about the poor. Let alone church. But it struck us that for the church to really take poverty seriously, this is not just a kind of social action thing. It's not about running a food bank. It's what does it mean to be church? A church which is itself poor and one in which people struggling against poverty feel fully part of and on their side. And that really struck a note. That's something that we've been exploring. How does this become core to what we are as church? And our mission to be good news to people and communities that are on the edge. And again, there's we can discuss some of the problems about the language, but people that are on the margins in the sense of society puts them on the margins. What does gospel mean? What does mission mean in and from that context? So that was a kind of intriguing thing, and it chimes with some of those things that we've been exploring and some of the things that people are living in their daily lives that we've been kind of working through with them over the past few years. So yeah, apparently I'm written a chapter on missiology. So it's always
Amen.
new fascinatings. Yes, fascinating. That's how one of the answers is how have I kept this job going for 28 years? Well, there's always new challenges and new opportunities and things that I never knew I'd be doing.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, I'm delighted that we have the wonderful Dr. Elizabeth Joy with us. So, Elizabeth, welcome. Hopefully we can see you. Yay! Hooray! How are you?
Fine, thank you.
Great. We're so glad
that
go on. We're so glad that you could join us on this podcast today. Elizabeth, you're part of the Malankara Syrian Orthodox Church. You're also a trustee at CTE, but you have a day job. Can you tell us about what you do?
Oh yeah, I have a day job, a part-time 3 days a week with the Dalit Solidarity Network. Dalit Solidarity Network was very officially registered in 2003, but had started its work much before that. So it's about 2 decades. Dalit Solidarity Network tries to look into the oppression of Dalits within the caste system, and the aim of Dalit Solidarity Network is to discriminate all caste-based discriminations and create a world without caste system or the Dalit discrimination against the Dalits. We have mainly 4 streams of work. All our work is under an umbrella branch called as Everyday Casteism Project. And we have 4 main streams of work. The one is with the advocacy and policy change. And we work with a stakeholder group, many of whom are Dalit organizations working for Dalit liberation. And we are trying to get caste included into the Equality Act of UK 2010. We already have about 9 characteristics, discriminatory characteristics that are made protective. And the caste system is still recognized under the racial justice. And we are asking the UK government to include caste as a separate discriminatory protective characteristic. And then we are lobbying for that quite a few years. And recently we have had a few MPs speaking at the Parliament houses. We hope we will be there someday. The second of work is to do with the Everyday Casteism campaign within UK. And the third one is dealing with cast out casteism in the higher educational institutions. And the fourth one is to deal with the business and human rights, looking at caste in the global supply chain. I hope I can stop here.
Yes, that's great. Thank you for giving us an overview of what you do. And I know you've written this chapter around mission and marginality, which we're going to come and have a look at. So let me now just give a little brief overview of the book, because there's only 3 of you or 4 of us here, but yet there's 17 chapters in the book. So let me say something generally about the book today, the sort of snapshot, a sort of rich, varied account of what mission looks like on the ground, the lived experiences of mission from a wide range of people and places and Christian traditions. I really like this idea of Christ plays in 10,000 places. It's a Gerald Manley Hopkins line from his poem As Kingfishers Catch Fire. And it's at its heart is this idea of God being at work and present in many different contexts, in different people's lives, and that there's no one theology of mission, but rather there are theologies of mission which are rooted in people's experiences, their histories, their church traditions. And so in the book, we've got chapters from the Antiochian Orthodox perspective, when the Church of the British Isles begins to venerate her own saints, then the church will grow. There's a chapter from Bisi Adenakan on Nigerian British young people and contextual mission. There's a chapter on mission in Scottish rural contexts. There's a chapter on communities of resistance, climate change, and migrants' rights. And so I guess in short, it's this polyphonic collection of voices. So we hear some from the institutional centres, like the Catholic perspective, and some which acknowledge the dramatic shifts and changes that Britain's undergone in the last sort of 40, 50, 60 years. The book is in lots of ways rooted in this quote from David Bosch, who was a South African missiologist, died in 1991 in a car crash. And he wrote this: missiology acts as a gadfly in the house of theology, creating unrest, resisting complacency, opposing every ecclesiastical impulse to self-preservation, every desire to stay as we are, every inclination towards provincialism, parochialism, every fragmentation of humanity into regional or ideological blocks. So this book, in lots of ways, is saying that there's still more work to be done for ecumenical mission to inhabit its place as a critical friend, as a crosser of boundaries, as an advocate for justice. And the key theme that sort of holds together all these disparate voices is the idea of an epistemology of disobedience. It's a term from the writer Walter Mignolo. And epistemology, in short, is the way that we know things. And what's important is to be able to unlearn and undo the tendency and the fallacy of a sort of a hubris of 0-point knowledge. Mignolo says, tongue-in-cheek, we know the first world has knowledge, the third world has culture, Native Americans have wisdom, Anglo-Americans have science. And all those kind of epistemic-laden assumptions have no place in, we think, the future of missiological writing. Or as the South African Vuyani Velum says, that we need to unthink the West, that the West and the ideology of how we think needs to be undone and reframed. So we wanted to disrupt the idea that missiology is written by old white men in theological colleges and denominational headquarters who are the intellectual authority of ideas about mission, and construct a kind of new theology of mission that takes seriously the experiences of the poor, the experiences of the marginalized, the experiences of those who in the past have had their voices ignored or reframed or annihilated, essentially. So we've got these brilliant authors of the chapters with us, and we've got to know them a little bit, but let's spend the next kind of 15-20 minutes hearing a bit more from them. And I'm going to kick off with Shermara. And Shermara, you wrote this chapter along with our friend and colleague, Dr. Lisa J., who works now for the Diocese of London, but is a CTE trustee, on mission and racial justice, ecumenical and millennial perspectives. Can you give us a little flavor of that chapter in kind of 3 or 4 minutes? I know that's not easy, but
yes, absolutely. So my half of the chapter is broken down into 3 parts, and it really comes from a deeply personal lived experience as well as a theological, cultural and political observation. So part 1, firstly, I reflect on the dissonance I felt being raised in a Black majority church context, which was a space deeply rooted in self-autonomy, creativity, leadership, mission and agency. And I remember the Black church as an affirming space. I saw men and women leading missional activities on an international, national, regional and local level. So it was a place where racial identity was celebrated, not just tolerated. And of course, there's a famous Sunday morning, we call it the exhortation spot, which meant by the age of even 5, most of us had already spoken publicly, learning how to lead, speaking in front of audiences. So you could see it was a real training ground for many young adults. So in this chapter, I really recount how these churches were also pioneered by West Indian Commonwealth citizens, many of whom came to the UK to help rebuild Britain after World War II. And I share that some of them were rejected by historical denominations who had previously evangelized their homelands on their missional exploits, and whilst others came over as reverse missionaries. So you kind of see this two-pronged approach with a burning desire to spread the gospel in a country that they now call home. And these were deeply missional spaces shaped by a theology of resistance as well as restoration. And I really try to bring that out in the book. I also share a personal story of my late grandfather, Stanford Fletcher, who used the famous white church van as a missional tool to engage with a lot of the children and young adults in the area. And we would call him a modern day church planter who created this kind of missional community in the heart of Birmingham in Quinton, and has just seen so much fruit grow from that small encounter. So I really wanted to locate it in experience. In the first half, I also describe some of the dissonance I encountered when I moved from this Black majority space of agency into a more white majority church institution. And for the first time, I wasn't just Shermara, I was a Black Christian or a Black Christian leader or a Black woman in leadership. And it just absolutely spun me, if I can use that millennial term. You know, I also witnessed a lot of global majority heritage clergy wrestling with this deep sense of calling, but often within a structure that didn't always affirm their full identity, especially in terms of race. And I kind of explore that pain and that reality and how it contrasted to where I was coming from, even though the institution assumed we all come from the same space. I speak about representation fatigue, the pressure to constantly show up, speak out, perform your identity in spaces, and really argue for the need for the church to move beyond socially constructed labels, and to also remember that migration has always been central to the story of mission, particularly in the Bible. From Abraham to the early church to Jesus himself, you always see in the movement of people with the movement of the good news story. And very quickly, part two of my chapter, I look at the global and cultural, and I'd also argue spiritual reckoning of the state execution of George Floyd back in 2020, what this meant for millennials, particularly Black millennials, which is what you asked me to write about. You know, it wasn't just a tragic news story. It was really a catalytic moment of awakening. You know, I expose how racial injustice and silence in the church often coexist. You see a lot of churches writing statements. You see the Church of England with its 100 million reparation fund. So I try to document some of the responses to George Floyd's murder across the ecumenical landscape. And also the exodus, bit controversial, but the exodus of a lot of Black millennials from white-led Black majority church attendant spaces, and just the kind of dissonance that's taking place in them, the tension of not being seen. I also talk about the toppling of Edward Colston's statue in Bristol, and I know that's very controversial, but I argue that it's not just a historical correction. Yeah. Shall I start wrapping up?
No. Just keep going, but just be mindful of yeah.
Yeah. And just saying that this was quite a controversial to some, but also to some a prophetic act. And then finally, I just talk about the broader political landscape, particularly in the rise of populism, particularly in the rise of social media algorithms that has the power and speed to socially construct and demonize the other in society. And I think this us versus them that's really pervading our culture is something that I reflect on. And I'll end here. I comment on the cultural war that if you now talk about justice, racism, misogyny, climate change, then you're labeled as this left-wing snowflake woke liberal warrior, and you know what's going on there, and also on the other hand, that elite liberalism can kind of be accused of shutting down difference, dismiss nuance, and kind of not critique the systems they benefit from. So I'll end there, but that's just a bit of flavour of what I speak about in my chapter.
Thank you. That's such a rich chapter. It's ram-packed with great stuff, and particularly I think one of those themes, this theme of mission and migration, is echoed in other chapters. Harvey Kouyani's chapter and Adi Bisi Adekan's chapter, and in Anne Palmer's as well. So really helpful to see that kind of theme weaving its way through many of the chapters. Let's turn to Neil. Neil, we already said you've been at Church Action on Poverty for just over 28 years now, and obviously you're reflecting on a deep history of experiencing alongside the poor what the reality of life is like. So tell us something about one or two key themes in your chapter.
Yeah, thanks. I think the chapter really explores, there's two different stories you can tell about low-income communities in the UK, and the context really is about economic marginalisation, people in communities that are struggling to make ends meet. The first story is a very negative story about the way in which people in communities are in some ways demonised, blamed for their poverty, blamed for society's problems more generally, and othered. There's this kind of concept of othering, which I think has echoes in other forms of marginalisation. But the issue around class is really important here. And I think one of the conversations which is least explored in church and in British society more generally. We're really uncomfortable with conversations about class. I touch on the fact that research shows the mainstream churches certainly are very predominantly middle class, and working class people, working class communities have been marginalised within the church. Our own research kind of echoed that. We looked at patterns of church closure, and in Greater Manchester, the mainstream denominations closed more churches in low-income communities than in more affluent communities over the past 10 years. And there's no reason to think Manchester's any different to anywhere else. So it's the history is of withdrawal, of seeing these places as places of failure, and theologically, that they're not, people don't go to church, so they're godless, communities, and negative in every sense, negative. And the church just reproduces the story that wider society tells. But if you actually spend time with people, and I draw on some work we did with groups of people who are members or connected with local churches in low-income communities in Greater Manchester, the story is actually completely different. And it's such a contrast between the kind of big picture story of decline and failure, and people actually talked incredibly warmly about the place of church and faith in their community. And in spite of the barriers that the institutions put in their way around class, around what leadership looks like, around language, around kind of how things are formed around middle class culture, which alienate so many people. When people come together, they still have faith, they still experience faith, they experience love, community, joy. These are the words people used about their relationship with their own faith, but the community of believers that they were part of. And actually, for me, this is the joy, that it's a completely different story, that it's not about the church having to take the gospel to poor communities. It's that, why are we surprised with this message? God is already there. People already have faith and live it out in the way that's culturally appropriate to them, in spite of the church trying to make them perform in ways which just don't fit their contexts. Just a couple of the stories, a couple of the quotes from people. We wish to see the gospel flourish here. This is where our kids are growing up. We want it to be a good place for them. And a lot of people speak badly of Partington. It's an estate right on the edges of Manchester. They just do. Why would you want to go there? It's an awful place. But we really love the community here, and we never want to speak badly of community. Yes, I think it's just make a difference where you are. Just try to live the gospel where you are. And that's really it. Just have a go. And that's wonderful theology from somebody who's, you know, an ordinary, everyday, working class Christian in Partington that most people think is, you know, just the back of beyond. It's beautiful. And this is the joy of being with and centering the voices of people who society puts on the margins. And there's so much that the rest of, I think, the church can learn from, spending time and centering those voices and those communities and actually investing in them. So it's the counter to the story of, well, these are places we just need to pull out of, or see that they're kind of deserts for middle-class missionaries to go into. These are places where people are living their Christian lives faithfully and doing it in a very grounded way. Another quote, just I'll finish on maybe. It doesn't matter what race you are, how rich you are, who you are, everybody is loved. People don't understand that. When you talk about love, they think it's soppy. No, it's not soppy. Christ loved everybody. Christ never kicked anybody out. He never refused anybody. It doesn't matter who you are, what you are. In Christ's eyes, we're all the same. Everybody in God's eyes is welcomed. What beautiful theology coming from somebody who's just an ordinary Christian living in a low-income community in Manchester. And these are the voices that we should be celebrating. This is the kind of theology that we should be joyous about, and really investing in long-term in those communities, in the leadership that people are already exercising in their communities. And how countercultural is that to everything we're told in society today?
Thank you, Neil. Yeah, brilliant. And what's just struck me is this idea on both your chapter, Shermara's, and Elizabeth's too. Is this is like a deconstructing or a lifting the veil on various forms of marginalization and telling the story from the people on the ground. We are 37 minutes in, so I'm going to ask Elizabeth. Elizabeth, you wrote a chapter on marginality as a mission priority and the idea of decolonizing theology to enable participation in God's mission. You've told us a little of the Dalit Solidarity Network. Could you say something quite briefly, because we don't have lots of time, a kind of the core idea in your chapter, and then I'll close with a few thoughts. So in the next kind of 3 or 4 minutes, that would be great, Elizabeth.
Thank you, Ben. My chapter titled "Marginality as Mission Priority," looking at decolonizing theology to participate in God's mission. I look at the current context. We are talking about marginality and looking at people at the margins, and I take it back and anchor it to Luke 4:16 following, which I prefer to call it as the mission mandate that Christ takes. And when we read that, Christ very explicitly states the purpose of why God has become a human being, and to fulfill and to give life in all its fullness, and becoming very inclusive. And that is what we see in Christ. So my chapter also focuses on the Catholic fathers, Samuel Ryan, who talks about decolonizing theology. See, for me, I was born and brought up in India. And of course, after the independence, there was a time when my Indian identity, and when we were struggling to look at what was imposed on us and what we could gain, we see that as a nation, many nations were trying for decolonizing. It was more a secular and a political venture. And now suddenly to hear that even our theologies need to be decolonized takes us to a different sphere. And when we look at people who are captivated, oppressed, even poverty, now there is, when we talk about marginality, especially in terms of poverty, very small proportion of the world population will be at the center, because we have all moved out to the marginal areas, and that affects the entire world population. And coming to the imposed identities, when we talk about the Dalit communities, we feel that when it comes to mission, in my chapter, I also talk about uh, the Pentecostal event as a mission model. People come from everywhere, they receive the Holy Spirit, and then mission begins. Church is formed, and then mission begins. I try to bring it within the Orthodox perspective and understanding, liturgy after liturgy, which is very important, because many a times we feel that all our spiritual exercise is over with the end of the worship service or the Holy Eucharist. No, it just urges us and then pushes us out. And what is called liturgy, the liturgy after liturgy. Liturgy is so very important for the Orthodox denomination. And then we even say liturgy is our theology and everything. But then our theology, our liturgy doesn't end with the Holy Eucharist, but moves beyond that into the mission work, where we can interact with the people, with communities, um, crossing all borders. And then I also bring in the metaphor of dining together, the table that we see in the Gospel of Luke, and I look at it as news, north, east, west, and south coming together, sitting together, eating together. Because when we look at the caste system, eating together was and is forbidden. The different castes, especially the upper caste and the outcasts, cannot even dine together. So when the Holy Eucharist speaks about people of different nations, different ethnicities, different languages, cultures coming together, we need to make that a reality. So again, coming to Joel, I look at the old people having dreams and the young people having vision. And I bring that together in the modern setting, saying old people, they have gone through a rich experience, and then they can sit back and with what they have gained, the insights, the experience, they have dreams. And the young people, especially in today's context, they're all very well educated, very well trained, and any office, any workplace you go, we look at the mission statement, the vision statement, and young people are leading that. So the church needs to bring in young people, and only when the older generation and the younger generation come together, then we will be able to realize the vision of Joel, and also bring into reality the Pentecostal mission model within the Orthodox perspective of realizing liturgy after liturgy. I hope I can stop here.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. And I really enjoyed editing and working through your chapter when we were in the process of putting the book together. It's now 1:15, so let me close with just a few final thoughts. I think that if you're listening to this as a Fresh Expressions practitioner, or you're involved in Fresh Expressions world, I think this book is really important, because there's a sense in which Fresh Expressions is a flow of the missional movement, which takes seriously Missio Dei, the idea that the church is turned inside out to the world. That great phrase from the Dutch theologian Hoekendijk. The church turns itself to the world. It exists to serve the world as a sheer gift in myriad ways. And I think the book really captures something of that. This idea that there's only 17 chapters in the book when there could have been 100. Christ plays in 10,000 places. And I'd urge you to buy a copy, to think more deeply about the idea that it's not just a theology of mission, but there are theologies of mission that are linked to the lived experiences of some of our guests today and the communities that they represent, but also lots of others. So I urge you to get a copy. You can, I think there's a link. There you go. Thank you, Mark. Or you can buy it directly from the SCM Press website. I want to thank again my wonderful guest, Shermara Fletcher-Hoyte from CTE, Dr. Elizabeth Joy from the Malankara Syrian Orthodox Church, and Niall Cooper from Church Action on Poverty. Thank you for being with me today, and God bless each of you. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.